The ground is shifting. We are watching Israel prepare to launch a land invasion of southern Lebanon. This is a major shift in Israel's conflict with Hezbollah.
Shane Harris covers intelligence and national security for The Post. He's been speaking to his intelligence and government sources, both in Washington and abroad, about this unfolding conflict between Israel and the militant group Hezbollah in Lebanon.
This was a very consequential past few days in Lebanon, starting with an Israeli airstrike that killed a man named Hasan Nasrallah, who is the head of Hezbollah, which is the dominant military and political force in Lebanon, a longtime adversary of Israel, a group that's been designated by the U.S. and other countries as a terrorist organization. Nasrallah is a major figure in the Middle East, and Israel's airstrike that killed him, along with, we believe, a number of other senior Hezbollah leaders, then kicked off an increased tempo in military operations in Lebanon that are kind of crescendoing as we talk right now.
Tensions on Israel's northern border have been building for months, with Israel and Hezbollah trading fire. But in recent weeks, Israel has been ratcheting up its attacks on what it says are Hezbollah targets. The impact inside Lebanon has been devastating.
Across Lebanon, hundreds of thousands of people have fled their homes, some camping out on streets, others seeking refuge in a parking lot.
Multiple explosions that were heard across the capital. They were loud explosions. The people of the capital were really in shock. There was a lot of fear.
The death toll has now surpassed 1,000 people, according to Lebanon's health ministry. The agency doesn't distinguish between combatant and civilian deaths, but said more than 80 children are among the dead. Entire buildings have been destroyed, and now hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing for safety. Then today, officials told reporters at The Post that Israel is planning an imminent, limited ground invasion into Lebanon.
There are a huge number of unknowns in this, one of which is, will this operation actually be limited? Will it expand? Could Israeli forces get bogged down in protracted fighting with Hezbollah, which we have seen happen before? And very importantly, what might Iran or Hezbollah's reaction be to this pretty significant escalation of the conflict by Israel? This is not a stable situation, and we are all kind of waiting to see hour by hour how it unfolds.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Elahe Izadi. It's Monday, September 30th. Today, Shane explains Israel's strategy in attacking Hezbollah inside of Lebanon, and whether this could pull Iran and the United States into a bigger regional conflict. I want to get to the news that we're seeing today on Monday about Israel planning a ground operation in Lebanon and what that means. But first, I do want to hear more about what got us to this point and what happened on Friday with the assassination of Hezbollah's leader, Hasan Nasrallah. Can you tell me more about him?
So Hasan Nasrallah has been the head of Hezbollah for now about 20 years or so. He was a Shiite cleric. I think it's important to think of him both as a kind of, political leader, but also a symbol of Hezbollah. And for many people, I think he's a symbol of the stalwart resistance to Israel that Hezbollah represents. Within Lebanon, I think many saw him as a fighter for causes that they cherish and hold dear, and he was seen as somebody as historically one of the great leaders. In the West, he is seen, obviously, in Israel very differently. I mean, he is seen as much more as the head of a radical militant organization. Putting all that aside, though, he is a political figure in Lebanon and has a deep history with Hezbollah as an organization. Hezbollah in Lebanon is a political force. It holds seats in parliament. It is kind of a dominant organization there on the political life and the day-to-day life of people in Lebanon. It provides social services. It is really kind of almost a civic organization in some ways. We talk a lot of times about militant organizations or terrorist organizations as if, they're these kind of diffused, often underground or clandestine organizations, which many of them are. Hezbollah is more like a government, or it's like a political party. I mean, it is a political party, literally. So Nasrallah sat at the top of that.
Is Hezbollah, up until now, more powerful than the official Lebanese government?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that, if for all intents and purposes, we can't really say Hezbollah is the government of Lebanon. That would be overstating it. It's a bit more complex than that. But yes, Hezbollah has been the most important and powerful organization politically, civically, militarily in Lebanon. And Nasrallah was in charge of that.
Yeah, and as you said, its sort of positioning toward Israel is what?
Well, it's an avowed enemy of Israel. It is often referred to as one of the axes of resistance, along with Iran and other proxy groups in the Middle East. There's a long, long history here of war between Israel and Hezbollah. So, its position is not unlike Iran, not unlike the Houthis in Yemen. These are organizations that do not recognize Israel as a legitimate country and consider it an enemy.
So why did Israel assassinate Nasrallah now?
Well, the why now is a really interesting question. One possibility, I think, is that they had the opportunity to do it. Israel may have figured out where Nasrallah was, along with these other senior people in the leadership ranks, and decided now was an opportune moment to take him out. The broader question of why kill him at all, in his first public remarks since the assassination, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed this question. And what he's saying there is, at the start of the week, I came to the conclusion that the blows the Israeli military had struck on Hezbollah within the past days, these blows will not be enough. Nasrallah's assassination was an essential condition to achieving the goals we set, Netanyahu said. I think this speaks to the strategy that Israel says it is pursuing right now, a strategy which, by the way, strikes many people in the Biden administration as disingenuous, is they are trying to, as they put it, escalate this war in order to de-escalate it. And what that means is that Israel wants to deal such a powerful blow to Hezbollah, to its fighting ranks, to its commanding ranks, its leadership, to its rocket and missile launchers, to its ammunition stocks, so that it can convince Hezbollah to stop the attacks it has been launching into Israel after the October 7th attacks. So Israel's position on this is essentially, we will, in self-defense, attack this organization and force them to basically negotiate directly with us to stop these attacks, to move their own forces out of southern Lebanon, where Israel sees them as a threat to civilians living across the border. Now, escalating to de-escalate, killing the head of the organization is a pretty big escalation.
Yeah.
And I think that there are a lot of people in the Biden administration and a lot of observers of this conflict who say, what this looks like is Israel trying to go in and basically just devastate Hezbollah and eliminate it as a threat, or degrade it so significantly that it doesn't pose the kind of threat that it did before. This is a huge escalation. This is taking out the leadership of their adversary, short of, another full-scale round of air raids on Lebanon and something like we saw in the 2006 war. It's not clear to me how much more you could escalate it. But Israel says what they are trying to do is force Hezbollah to negotiate directly with them, separate from whatever is going on in Gaza, which is the reason that Hezbollah says it's been attacking Israel for nearly a year.
So then after this assassination, the next phase, it looks like it's escalating with this news today, that Israel is planning a ground operation inside of Lebanon. What does that look like?
What we understand is that Israel has told the Biden administration that it's planning a limited incursion into the south of Lebanon with, it looks like, the goal of eliminating rocket launching positions, tunnels, maybe some locations of Hezbollah forces, basically kind of getting rid of what has been this threat coming from southern Lebanon across the border into the north of Israel. So Israel says our job now is to eliminate that threat in a limited military operation. This is not going to look like what's been going on in Gaza, for instance.
Shane, you mentioned these attacks on northern Israel. Can you just briefly remind us what kind of attacks Hezbollah has been launching on Israel over the past year?
Yeah, really since October 8th, so a day after the invasion of Israel by Hamas and the killings they perpetrated there, Hezbollah has been launching, artillery and rockets into the northern area of Israel along the border that Israel shares with Lebanon. And what's significant about this is that it has forced the evacuation of around 70,000 Israeli civilians who haven't been able to return to their homes there in the north. It's not safe for them. And there have been people who've had to evacuate parts of southern Lebanon as well. And this has really increased political pressure and social pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to essentially make it safe for those people to go back. And making it safe would mean stopping the Hezbollah forces on the other side of the border from firing. So there's been this kind of daily back and forth of firing between Hezbollah and Israel that has been kind of, compared to what's going on in Gaza, we would call it sort of at a low simmer compared to the massive campaign that's going on there.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, Israel has killed Nasrallah. I'm wondering, what does his death mean for the future of Hezbollah inside of Lebanon? Has the organization been dealt a death blow by this?
I think it's too soon to say that they've been dealt a death blow, but we should be clear. This is a massive, massive blow to the organization of Hezbollah. And I think we need to look at, obviously, the death of the leader, and any organization is often a big deal, but also what's preceded it in these, 2 weeks or so. We had that pager and walkie-talkie explosion attack. That, by a number of estimates, could have sidelined around 2,000 Hezbollah fighters. So that happened. It was followed some days later by an attack on what's called the Radwan, which is the sort of elite special operations forces of Hezbollah. Their leader and others had gathered for a meeting, probably because they couldn't communicate on their normal communications devices. Israel killed them. And then you have this strike as well on Nasrallah, as well as there have been other strikes on leadership targets in Hezbollah. So the organization in a very short period of time has essentially seen its leadership structure dismantled. And it's a real question now of, okay, who do they appoint to succeed Nasrallah? How does that person do the job? How do they even communicate? From our reporting, myself and colleagues, what we are picking up is really Hezbollah is kind of stunned at this moment and is trying to figure out how does it recover. It's been severely knocked back. And I think that this is a moment that Israel sees as one of maximum opportunity, that when your enemy is down, you keep going. You keep, punching them, essentially. That's how Israel is seeing this. So the future of Hezbollah is really kind of in question. I mean, as a movement, nominally it continues to exist, but its leadership is very much a big question mark right now.
So another piece of this is Iran, which is Hezbollah's biggest financial backer and ally. What is the Iranian government saying about Nasrallah's death?
They're predictably saying a lot of things, like praising him, saying that there will be, retribution for this. Practically speaking, our reporting suggests that Iran is also sort of knocked back a bit and trying to figure out what to do next. The general kind of analysis by the U.S. intelligence community and a lot of observers now for quite a while has been that Iran does not want a direct confrontation with Israel. Look past all the predictable kind of bellicose, patriotic rhetoric that's coming from Iran or any side in this really, and really ask, what is the strategic aim here? And Iran, I think, does not want a direct confrontation with Israel because they know that militarily they are outmatched by the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. Hezbollah was a very important buffer and a proxy for Iran against Israel because Hezbollah is armed with hundreds, if not thousands, of missiles that can reach deep into Israeli territory, could kill potentially a lot of civilians. That arsenal is a buffer against Israel attacking Iran's ability to manufacture nuclear weapons. So that is all in question at this point. That's all kind of in flux. So I think that right now Iran is trying to figure out, okay, well, what does this look like? How does this change the strategic calculus? And no one knows the answer to that. I don't know that. Iran doesn't know that. I don't think Israel can really know that. But we're at this period of tremendous instability, which I think is keeping Iran guessing and realizing now that maybe the strategic calculation that it has made up to this point is going to have to change.
After the break, Shane explains the role the United States is playing at this moment. We'll be right back. Shane, I want to ask now about the United States because it is Israel's closest ally. What has the U.S. said about Israel's actions inside of Lebanon?
So Nasrallah's death was greeted pretty unequivocally as a good thing by President Biden and Vice President Harris, who, of course, is the Democratic nominee for president. They both came out with statements saying Nasrallah had blood on his hands, including the blood of Americans. Hezbollah has been linked to a number of severe terrorist attacks over the years, including some that have killed Americans, including most famously in 1983, the destruction of the Marine barracks in Lebanon, which killed hundreds of U.S. Marines. So Nasrallah, from the U.S. point of view, is a bad guy, and nobody was, in the Biden administration was mourning his loss. Mm-hmm. But those statements were also coupled with a kind of urgent insistence by the Biden administration that there be some kind of ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. The Biden administration has been pushing for kind of a 21-day ceasefire just to let everybody cool off while they try and work on a longer-term solution, as well as a ceasefire in Gaza. But, practically speaking, it does not seem like the United States has very much influence right now.
Why do you say that? I mean, that's kind of, I guess that's been a theme through the war in Gaza in some ways, but it is kind of astounding that its closest ally and this huge power does not have influence right now.
Yeah, not enough to stop them from invading Lebanon. The whole history of this war, you're right to point this out, has been one in which the United States and the Biden administration has presented this kind of unequivocal support for Israel in terms of its defense against its adversaries, its right to exist. The United States provides the weapons that Israel uses. It is its most important political supporter. And Joe Biden has been a stalwart supporter of Israel, despite the fact that he has come out and criticized military operations in Gaza at some point and put political pressure on the Israelis to come to some kind of, cessation in the war. He is still, rock solidly in Israel's corner. That has not meant that the Biden administration has been able to dictate the conduct of the war, the severity of the war. It has been reported, and U.S. officials have confirmed to us, that Israel did not tell Washington before it took this strike that killed Nasrallah. It does not come and give a heads up before these big operations. We didn't know, the United States, about the pager attacks, reportedly. So, you really have to question whether or not the things that Washington says and the diplomacy that it's carrying out behind the scenes really is having any practical effect, if what Israel then turns around and does is precisely what the United States doesn't want to happen, which is to escalate this war and increase the chances that it will become a wider regional war. And that's kind of always been sort of the dreaded outcome. The Biden administration has always said, we don't want what's happening in Gaza to become a conflagration that engulfs the Middle East. And we should be clear, that has not happened yet. But this next phase that Washington is worried about for so long, of Israel now taking the war to Hezbollah in Lebanon, that is happening. That is not something that the United States wanted to happen, and it is happening in a very, very big way. And I don't really think practically there's much that Washington can do to stop it right now.
But I'm wondering, what does the fact that Israel did not loop them in, and now they are taking it to inside of Lebanon, where does that leave U.S. officials? Because I'm sure they're trying to protect their strategic interests too.
Sure. I mean, look, Bibi Netanyahu does not feel like he needs Joe Biden's permission to launch operations in Lebanon or to defend Israel how he thinks it should be defended. And, I think that while publicly and privately, these are still allies. I mean, Israel has been running this operation largely the way it wants since, after October 7th. Absent the United States just simply refusing to ship any new weapons or sell Israel new weapons, there's not a whole lot that can be done, I think, to deter Israel from the course that it's been on. And, in the reporting trips that I've made to Israel, officials are obviously very grateful for American support, but they're not sitting there, asking Mother May I of the Biden administration.
Is there any appetite to use that as a leverage point, stopping the shipment of more military aid?
Not in the Biden administration, no. I mean, even some of the, temporary cessations that have been placed on some shipments have been then followed up by new sales of weapons. I mean, practically speaking, there's nothing the Biden administration has ever done in a meaningful way that would signal a change in the policy of the U.S. providing weapons to Israel. And that would be, by the way, like the major point of leverage that the U.S. would use. But Joe Biden is about as solid a supporter of Israel as you could imagine in a U.S. president. For him, it is very deep. It is very personal. It goes back many, many decades in his history and politics. And the Israelis know that, by the way. I mean, they kind of take it for granted. But, we should also underscore, what Israel is doing right now from its position is not simply just to spite the United States or to sort of, slap them away. Israel and its leadership sees the struggle that they're in right now since October 7th as existential. And they view Hezbollah as this long-standing enemy that they must deal with now because they view everything now through the light of October 7th. They don't take anything for granted anymore about their security. And it's been true that since even the war in 2006 with Hezbollah, Israel has devoted more attention and more intelligence and resources to dealing with Hezbollah. Now what you're seeing is kind of the culmination of that investment. And I think that post-October 7th, Israel says this is the moment to go hard at our adversaries and ensure that they cannot pose a threat to us anymore.
I'm also wondering about what this means for already fragile, perhaps non-existent U.S.-Iran relations, given that, Iran is Hezbollah's biggest backer and the U.S. is Israel's biggest backer.
Yeah, this will not do anything to improve, U.S.-Iran relations, which, as you say, they're not good. There is some question about whether or not Iran and the United States would start again some kind of new agreement on Iran's nuclear program. Practically speaking, I think that's a very distant prospect at this point.
And that probably also depends on who's the next president.
It absolutely would depend on who's the next president, since it was Donald Trump that pulled out of that deal when he was president and doesn't seem all that likely to restart it, although he's said some confusing things on the campaign trail about that. But we would have to wait and see. But, from the United States perspective, they very much do not want to see Iran pulled into direct conflict either with Israel. That would be sort of the worst possible outcome. But, the United States and the intelligence agencies understand that Iran looks at Hezbollah as its primary kind of buffer with Israel. So the question now in the United States and in Israel will be, what is Iran's next move? I mean, do they escalate, or do they try and come to some kind of new status quo so that they can preserve Hezbollah and that missile arsenal as a strategic buffer against Israel? And that, too, is kind of a big question mark. I would have to say that so far, while we have seen a lot of hot rhetoric coming out of Iran, we haven't seen, at least since, the pager attack, and certainly not in the past few days, anything that would indicate Iran is about to escalate. Nothing like back in April when Iran sent drones and missiles at Israel and what was really, this kind of unprecedented direct attack. But that was in response to an Israeli attack on Iranian diplomatic facilities. So the calculation was a little bit different there.
Lastly, Shane, I'm wondering what this all means for ceasefire efforts. There have been calls, including by President Joe Biden, for there to be a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, for a hostage deal. And that has not happened, despite, I keep feeling like there's whiplash. Like I see reporting, it's close, and then nothing happens. And now there's talk of there should be a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And what does this killing and the bombings and strikes we've seen over the past few days and the escalation from Israel, What does all that mean for ceasefire efforts with both of these situations?
I think that is really maybe the big question in all of this. One of the reasons Israel says it's escalating with these attacks on Hezbollah is to get Hezbollah to reach a ceasefire agreement with Israel that is not conditioned on what happens in Gaza. So for almost a year now, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel, according to Hezbollah, because they're standing in solidarity with Hamas in Gaza. And they have said, until Israel reaches an agreement to ceasefire with Hamas, we, Hezbollah, will continue these attacks on Israel. Israel wants Hezbollah to delink these two. It says, forget about Hamas in Gaza. You're going to deal directly with us so we can make conditions safe for our people to return in the north. Will that work? Will that pay off? I mean, that is the gamble that Israel is taking. I mean, I think they believe that they can so pummel Hezbollah that they will force them to the table. I will say that when I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with an Israeli official about this strategy, that person said, we think that in less than a few weeks we can have this kind of done and Hezbollah will realize the error of its ways and that it has to deal with us directly, and we think we'll be in good shape. That has not happened. We are not close to that happening right now. Israel's about to send troops into Lebanon, so you really have to question whether that strategy was ever all that smart or, frankly, even that genuine to begin with. As far as the possibility of a ceasefire with Hamas in Gaza, all parties, I think, will privately say they do not think that they are anywhere close to that. And in fact, what the Israelis have said, and what this Israeli official said to me, is that one of the reasons that they wanted to escalate the situation with Hezbollah is because they are so far away from a deal with Hamas. So this condition that Hezbollah said was necessary, a ceasefire with Hamas, to reach an accommodation with Israel, Israel said, that's not happening. So we have to act now independently against Hezbollah.
Shane, thanks so much for making time and sharing your reporting with us.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Shane Harris is a national security reporter for The Post. Before I go, there are two other big stories I'm watching today. Several southern states are experiencing extreme flooding from Hurricane Helene. The hurricane made landfall in Florida on Thursday and pushed north, bringing extreme weather to South Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, and then in North Carolina, torrential rain unloaded as much as 30 inches in the mountains, causing catastrophic landslides. More than 100 people have died across at least 6 states. High water has swept away homes and vehicles. Hundreds of roads have been washed out. Bridges have been destroyed. Janetta Barfield is a traveling nurse in Asheville, North Carolina. She got trapped in her flooded car on Friday as she was leaving her overnight hospital shift. Here she is talking to the Associated Press.
And even before the officer got to me, the water was all the way up to my chest inside my car. I couldn't even think what was going on. It happened so fast to me and scared the life out of me.
And 2 programs meant to help people with student loans expire today. One program let borrowers ease their way back into repaying loans. It also effectively shielded them from consequences of missing payments, like getting dings on their credit reports. The second program, called Fresh Start, helped people who were in default on some federal student loans. These were temporary initiatives from the Biden administration. Advocacy groups have called them critical safety nets, and now worry that borrowers who counted on them will suffer. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. If you're looking for the latest updates on the big news of the day, check out our morning news briefing, The 7. We bring you the 7 stories you need to know about every weekday morning by 7 a.m. You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's show was produced by Emma Talkoff with help from Rennie Svirnovsky. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Monica Campbell with help from Rena Flores. Thanks to Joe Snell and Ben Pauker. I'm Elahe Izadi. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from The Washington Post.